Sarah Mitchell sat alone at the corner table of the Harbor Café, an upscale establishment in downtown San Diego that overlooked the bay. At 29 years old, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from surviving things most people only saw in movies. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a casual white tank top with dark jeans. The afternoon sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated her table, casting warm light across the book she was reading. The café was her sanctuary, a place where she could disappear into the crowd of business lunches and tourist groups, where nobody knew her story, and she didn't have to carry the weight of what she'd done, what she'd survived, what she'd lost. But sanctuary, as Sarah had learned in the mountains of Afghanistan, was always temporary. The tattoo on her left forearm was impossible to miss when she reached for her iced coffee. The Naval Special Warfare Trident, the SEAL insignia, rendered in stunning detail with deep blacks and subtle shading. Below it, a set of coordinates, 34.5553 degrees north, 69.2075 degrees east. Most people who noticed assumed it was a memorial, a tribute to someone she'd lost. They were half right. Those coordinates marked the exact location where Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, Navy hospital corpsman assigned to SEAL Team 3, had made a choice that would haunt her for the rest of her life, where she had decided that 12 lives mattered more than following orders, where she had earned a Silver Star and a medical discharge in the same 60-minute window of hell that at a nearby table, for men in expensive suits were finishing their second round of cocktails. The Harbor Café was their regular spot for business lunches that had very little to do with business. Tyler Westbrook, 38, was the ringleader, a venture capitalist who measured his worth in the number of startups he'd bankrupted and the women he'd intimidated into silence. His friends were cut from the same cloth. Marcus Chen, an investment banker, David Sullivan, a real estate developer, and Brandon Pierce, a social media marketing executive whose entire personality revolved around his follower count. They were loud, entitled, and becoming increasingly intoxicated as the afternoon wore on. Their conversation had devolved from market trends to crude jokes about the waitstaff, rating women at other tables like they were judging a competition. 10 o'clock, Marcus said, nodding toward Sarah's table. Brunette with the book. Solid 7. Tyler followed his gaze, his eyes immediately locking onto Sarah's exposed forearm. Hold on, is that a military tattoo? David squinted across the cafe. Looks like it. Navy SEAL thing, I think. Brandon was already pulling out his phone to take a photo. Bro, that's stolen valor for sure. Girls get those tattoos all the time now. It's like a trend or something. Tyler's face lit up with cruel amusement. You know what? I'm gonna call her out on it. His friends tried to protest half-heartedly, but the alcohol and ego had already made his decision. He stood up, straightening his tie, and walked directly to Sarah's table with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. Excuse me, Tyler said, his voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. I couldn't help but notice your ink. Sarah looked up from her book, her hazel eyes meeting his with calm assessment. She'd seen this type before, in bars near military bases, in airports, in corporate spaces where men like this felt invincible. Can I help you? That's a SEAL trident, right? Tyler leaned against her table uninvited. Pretty elaborate tattoo for someone who... Well, you know, for someone who what? Sarah's voice remained level, though her free hand had instinctively moved to rest flat on the table. Ready. Always ready. Marcus, David, and Brandon had joined Tyler now, forming a semicircle around her table. The cafe's ambient noise seemed to dim as other patrons sensed the tension and turned to watch. For someone who clearly isn't a Navy SEAL, Brandon said, holding up his phone to record. I mean, come on. We all know they don't let women into the SEALs. This is like, what, stolen valor? That's actually illegal, you know? Sarah closed her book slowly, marking her page with deliberate care. The tattoo is real. The service is real. Anything else you'd like to know? Really? Tyler's smirk widened. He reached out and, without permission, traced his finger along the outline of the trident on her forearm. Because this looks like something you picked out of a catalog at some strip mall tattoo parlor. What's next? Gonna tell us you're a fighter pilot too? The physical contact crossed a line. Sarah's entire body went rigid, every muscle tensing in a way that anyone with military training would recognize as a threat display. But these four men had never been in a situation where their actions had real consequences. "Sir, I'm going to ask you once to remove your hand from my arm." Tyler laughed, his fingers still pressed against her skin. "Or what? You gonna SEAL Team 6 me?" His friends erupted in laughter, encouraging his performance. What none of them noticed was the sudden change in atmosphere outside. The Harbor Café sat on a busy street corner, but the usual flow of pedestrian traffic had stopped. Black SUVs and pickup trucks were pulling up to the curb, parking with military precision in every available space. Inside, Sarah was calculating her options. She could leave, walk away like she'd done a dozen times before when civilians decided to test her. She could defend herself physically, though that would create exactly the kind of scene she spent her life avoiding. Or she could do what her therapist had suggested. Use her words, set boundaries, and hope these men had enough sense to back down. "Those coordinates," David said, pointing at the numbers below the Trident. "What are those supposed to be?" "The location of your favorite Starbucks. It's where she got the tattoo, bro," Marcus added. "Probably some tourist trap in Thailand." Sarah's hands were shaking now, not from fear but from the effort of keeping her training in check. Those coordinates represented the worst and best moment of her life. The place where she'd held pressure on wounds while calling in air support. Where she'd made the decision to disobey a direct order and run into enemy fire. Where she'd carried men twice her size to safety while bullets tore through the air around her. "Those coordinates," she said, her voice dropping to something cold and dangerous, "are classified." Tyler barked a laugh. "Classified? Jesus. She's really committed to this fantasy." He turned to address the growing audience of cafe patrons. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a real-life military hero here. Please, tell us more about your classified missions." That's when Brandon made a critical error. He reached down and grabbed Sarah's wrist, pulling her arm up to get a better angle for his phone camera. "Let's get a close-up of this classified tattoo for my followers." Sarah's reaction was instantaneous. Years of combatives training took over. In one fluid motion, she twisted her wrist free, trapped Brandon's arm, and had him bent over the table with his face pressed against the wood. The entire movement took less than 2 seconds. "I told you not to touch me," she said quietly, releasing him before any real damage was done. Brandon stumbled backward, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. "You crazy bitch! You assaulted me! You grabbed her first, bro." Someone from a nearby table called out. We all saw it, but Tyler wasn't backing down. The alcohol and wounded pride had created a dangerous combination. "You know what I think? I think you're a fraud. I think you bought that tattoo to get attention, to play soldier, to get free drinks from actual veterans." "Tyler, maybe we should go," Marcus said nervously, finally sensing that this situation was spiraling beyond their control. "No," Tyler shot back. "I'm sick of people like her disrespecting what our military actually does. My grandfather was a Marine. Real service members don't go around showing off fake tattoos in cafes." Sarah stood up slowly, her 5'6" frame somehow seeming much larger in that moment. "Your grandfather would be ashamed of how you're acting right now." The cafe went deadly silent. Even Tyler seemed to recognize he'd pushed too far. But before he could respond, the front door opened. Commander James Reaper Harrison was not a man who made dramatic entrances. At 41 years old, with 15 years in naval special warfare, he'd learned that true operators moved quietly, efficiently, and always with purpose. But when he walked through the door of the Harbor Café, followed by 8 active-duty SEALs still in their Navy working uniforms, the effect was as dramatic as any Hollywood movie. The commander's eyes swept the room with practiced efficiency, taking in the scene in seconds. Sarah standing at her table, for civilian males in aggressive postures around her, a crowd of onlookers filming with their phones. His jaw tightened. Behind him, Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Diesel Thompson, a mountain of a man at 6'4" and 240 pounds of pure muscle, was already assessing threats. The other SEALs fanned out instinctively, creating a perimeter that trapped Tyler and his friends in their positions. "Commander Harrison," Sarah said, her voice tight with emotion she was fighting to control. "Sir, I didn't know you were in San Diego." "Staff Sergeant Mitchell," the commander replied, and the use of her former rank made several people in the café gasp. "We heard there might be a situation involving one of our own." Tyler's face had gone from red to pale in seconds. The sudden arrival of actual Navy SEALs, identifiable by their uniforms, their bearing, and the quiet menace they radiated, had sobered him up faster than any amount of coffee could have. We were just," Tyler stammered. "You were just what?" Commander Harrison's voice could have cut steel. He walked slowly towards Sarah's table, his eyes never leaving Tyler's face. "You were just harassing a decorated combat veteran? You were just putting your hands on someone who's done more for this country in one mission than you'll do in your entire life." "We didn't know," David tried to explain. "She didn't say anything about—" "She shouldn't have to," Senior Chief Thompson interrupted, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "The fact that you forethought it was acceptable to mock someone's military service, to put your hands on a woman without permission, that tells us everything we need to know about you." The other SEALs had positioned themselves around the café, ensuring that Tyler's group had no easy exit. But this wasn't about physical intimidation. This was about something far more profound, forcing these men to confront exactly who and what they'd been mocking. Commander Harrison turned to Sarah, his expression softening. "Staff Sergeant, with your permission, I'd like to tell these gentlemen your story." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, knowing that her privacy, her carefully maintained anonymity, was about to be shattered. But she also knew that sometimes the only way to educate was through truth. She nodded once. "For years ago," Commander Harrison began, his voice carrying to every corner of the now-silent café, Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell was serving as a hospital corpsman attached to SEAL Team 3 in Afghanistan. On September 15, 2021, her team was conducting a village clearance operation when they were ambushed by enemy forces. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. The firefight lasted 7 hours. 12 SEALs were wounded, pinned down in a compound with limited ammunition and no clear avenue for evacuation. Command made the decision to wait for air support rather than risk additional casualties. Tyler tried to speak, but one look from Senior Chief Thompson silenced him. Staff Sergeant Mitchell disagreed with that assessment. The commander continued. She assessed the casualties, realized that 3 men would die within the hour without immediate evacuation, and made a choice. She disobeyed a direct order, grabbed her medical pack, and ran 300 meters through enemy fire to reach the wounded. The café was so quiet that the only sound was the gentle hum of the espresso machine behind the counter. Every person was transfixed, many of them filming on their phones now for entirely different reasons. For the next 4 hours, Commander Harrison's voice grew thick with emotion. While we coordinated rescue operations and close air support, Staff Sergeant Mitchell kept 12 men alive. She performed emergency battlefield surgery under fire. She called in targeting coordinates for airstrikes while administering blood transfusions. She carried wounded SEALs, men who outweighed her by 100 pounds, to safer positions. He walked over to Sarah's table and pointed at the coordinates tattooed below her trident. These numbers represent the exact location where Staff Sergeant Mitchell made her stand, where she decided that 12 lives were worth more than following orders, where she earned a silver star, a Purple Heart, and a medical discharge due to injuries sustained during the rescue. A woman in the back of the café started crying. The elderly man at the counter, wearing a Vietnam veteran cap, stood at attention. "So when you gentlemen decided to mock her tattoo," Commander Harrison turned back to Tyler's group, his voice dropping to something cold and final. "You weren't just disrespecting one veteran. You were disrespecting every man in this room who owes his life to her courage." He gestured to the SEALs positioned around the café. Lieutenant Rodriguez, she pulled him out of a collapsed building. Petty Officer Chun, she held pressure on his femoral artery for 40 minutes. Senior Chief Thompson, She carried him 300 meters with a bullet in her own shoulder. Each man nodded as they were named, their eyes fixed on Sarah with undisguised admiration and gratitude. Brandon's phone had stopped recording. His hands were shaking too badly to hold it steady. Marcus had tears streaming down his face. Whether from shame or emotion was unclear. David looked like he might be sick. And Tyler's entire worldview was crumbling in real time. "I didn't know," Tyler whispered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You didn't know because you didn't bother to ask," Sarah said, her voice steady now. "You saw a tattoo, made assumptions, and decided I was fair game for your entertainment." She stepped forward, looking each man directly in the eye. "I don't wear this tattoo for attention. I wear it because every single day I need to remember what I did, who I saved, and what it cost me. This isn't decoration. It's a reminder that every choice has consequences." Tyler fell to his knees, the alcohol and shame overwhelming him. Please, I'm sorry. My grandfather, he really was a Marine. If he knew what I just did, what I just said, then honor his memory by being better," Sarah replied. "By recognizing that service comes in many forms, that sacrifice isn't always visible, and that you have no right to judge anyone's story until you know it." Commander Harrison placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Staff Sergeant, we've got a team dinner tonight, the whole platoon. It would mean a lot if you'd join us." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile that had crossed her face since the confrontation began. "It would be my honor, Commander." As the SEALs prepared to leave, Senior Chief Thompson approached Tyler's group. "You four are going to sit here, reflect on what happened today, and think very carefully about how you treat people moving forward. And you're going to pick up the tab for everyone in this cafe, including Staff Sergeant Mitchell's meal." "Of course," Marcus said quickly, pulling out his wallet. "Anything. We'll do anything. We don't want your money for ourselves," Sarah said. "Donate to the Navy SEAL Foundation, $5,000 each, in the names of the men I saved that day." The four men nodded frantically, fumbling for their phones to make the donations immediately, as if speed might somehow absolve them of their sins. That as Sarah walked out of the harbor cafe surrounded by her SEAL brothers, the afternoon sun seemed brighter than it had in years. She'd spent so long hiding, trying to blend in, attempting to leave her past behind. But maybe, she thought, the past wasn't something to hide from. Maybe it was something to carry with pride. The cafe erupted in applause as they left. The elderly Vietnam veteran rendered a sharp salute. Parents pointed them out to their children, explaining what real heroes looked like. And Tyler's group sat in stunned silence, each man beginning the long process of confronting who they were and who they needed to become. 3 weeks later, the Harbor Cafe would hang a small plaque near Sarah's favorite table, reserved for heroes. And Sarah, who had spent years avoiding attention, found herself returning regularly, not to hide, but to remember that sometimes the world needed to see that heroes came in all forms. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed someone being judged unfairly based on their appearance? Have you ever made assumptions about someone only to discover you were completely wrong? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else learn this crucial lesson. And if the story moved you, if it reminded you to look beyond surface judgments and recognize the heroes walking among us, hit that subscribe button. Because everyone has a story worth telling, and everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, not just what they appear to be.